The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together.
Well, they didn't.
Very serious.
The referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hello and welcome to episode number 46 of the Scottish Independence podcast, and this time I spoke to David Comerford, who is an economist at the University of Stirling and is working on the European Social Research Council's Future of the UK and Scotland project. I think you'll need to get your thinking cap on for this one, so we'll just go straight to the conversation. Hi David, how's it going?
It's going very well, thanks. You've saved me a drive into Stirling this morning.
What were you going there for?
That's where I'm based as part of this ESRC project. Working with Professor David Bell at Stirling on the economics of independence.
So this project is non-partisan, and would you just like to tell the listeners a bit more about it?
In 2012, the ESRC advertised for academics to bid for money under the Future of the UK and Scotland project. So one of the successful bidders for that money was Professor David Bell at Stirling, and he's recruited a team to work with him and help study some of the issues around the independence debate, and it's an academic study, so yeah, it's definitely impartial.
People sometimes suggest that academic groups aren't as impartial as perhaps they'd like to suggest, but in your daily work, are you seeing anything towards that?
I think everybody has a starting point that they're coming from, and that informs the issues that they want to study. But as far as I can tell, the analysis is not partial. So the questions that you choose to study, you possibly know before you start studying them whether they're likely to be helpful to the yes side or to the no side. But the analysis that you do in studying these issues is not beyond reproach, but it's certainly, as far as I can tell, people have not studied it in a way that suggests that they're digging for dirt.
Yeah, I mean, it's often the journalists will look for the most sensational thing in any analysis. It's something you see with, I'm speaking as someone who's suffering from a bit of a cold today, but quite often you see somebody make some kind of small breakthrough in viral research and they run with cure for the common cold. Whereas like on this Scottish independence debate, in some of these reports, both sides will latch on to a little thing and say, okay, this is financial heaven if we're independent, and this is financial disaster if we're independent. I mean, how do you feel the spin on some of these analysis reports is? Do you think what we read is the spin and not the substance?
I think that's necessarily the case. I mean, the media is going to have to go for something that's relatively simple, whereas the reports themselves are not simple. So to a certain extent, there is something for all sides in almost every bit of analysis that is produced. And as a campaigner, you would want the bit that you want to focus on to be the one that the media picks up. And the media's job maybe should be to be able to balance them in a consistent and in a way that people can understand. But too often, I think, in the media reporting of some of these things is the Yes campaign have said something and the No campaign have said something, and they're both basing it on the same report, and these things are apparently diametrically opposed, whereas the source for both sides is the same report, and there's some underlying consistency there, which is not, I don't feel, is coming across in the media at all.
Okay, so if we take one of the themes that's coming up in the debate quite a lot, which is that of inequality, how Great Britain is quite an unequal society compared to other ones around the world, or particularly in North Europe. Could you tell us a bit more some of the facts on that, with a bit less of the spin that we're used to seeing?
Well, it's the case. Britain is not a particularly equal country within Europe. It's less unequal when you compare it with sort of worldwide comparators like the USA, obviously. But within Europe, Britain's a fairly unequal country. Digging slightly below that, what you find is that Scotland and the rest of the UK, completely excluding London, are a bit more equal than the UK, including London. So the inequality comes basically from very, very high incomes in London. Britain's also the most regionally unequal country in Europe. So there are no other countries in Europe at all that have such regional disparities with such a wealth. Inner London is the wealthiest region in Europe, whereas the UK is only an averagely rich country. So yes, the UK is unequal. Could Scotland do much about it? People who want to believe that that's the case often point to the Nordic countries. Some work that we've recently done has shown that these countries, whilst they're slightly more equal in terms of the sort of redistributive policies that the governments there have chosen, a lot of the drivers of what makes them more equal as an outcome is the fact that they actually have a more equal wage structure. And I'm not sure the policies that would lead to that have been particularly elucidated, certainly by the campaigns, or certainly by the governments. Something that is going more along those lines is the sort of Commonweal type movement, which is talking more about how to get more equal market distributions rather than having this unequal distribution of wages, say, and the government then sorting that out after the fact using taxes and benefits. It doesn't look to me that taxes and benefits would achieve the level of the Nordic income distributions. It has to be done at a more fundamental level. We need to equalise wages in order to get that. Whereas I think a lot of the campaign spin is about the UK government is reducing benefits. But benefits are only ever going to be a small part of this.
So what about the idea that, reducing benefits reduces the amount of money in circulation with the population as well, and therefore sort of lowers the bar for everyone?
Possibly something in it, but it's just not it's not going to be a large effect compared to what needs to be achieved. And if your aim is to achieve the income distribution of Sweden or Norway or Denmark.
So what does need to be achieved? You mentioned the Reid Foundation plan, the suggestion that if you raise the wages, then you increase the tax take. You just mentioned that there, but would you expand? Is that a realistic proposal, do you think?
Well, it's not so much that you raise the wages and you increase the tax take. If your aim is to reduce inequality, then what you have to see is reduced inequality of wages. The people on the boards have to be getting less of a differential between the people who are at the bottom wage levels and within any organisation. And the policies that they're talking about to get sort of more worker representation on boards and things like that sounds to me to be a reasonable prospectus. Whether it'll be successful in the long run, I don't know, but at least what they're talking about addresses the real drivers of it, which is the differential in wages that we see in the UK compared with these more equal societies. It's the difference between the UK and these more equal societies is not really to do with how much the tax and benefit system flattens things out.
Another economic measure that's come up in the debate quite a lot is the SNP's promise to reduce corporation tax. Keeping in mind that the goal in this hypothetical situation is that we're trying to reduce inequality, do you think a reduction in corporation tax is likely to bring that about? Or would it have other knock-on benefits that would be good for an independent Scotland?
I don't think it can be viewed as an inequality reducing measure at all. So no is the answer to the first part of that question. But if you think about the best way to raise taxes and the best way to have a tax base, what you have to consider is the mobility of the tax base that you're targeting. And ownership and capital is a very mobile tax base. So there is some rationale between the SNP's proposal to reduce corporation tax to 3 pence less than what pertains in the rest of the UK, because if companies can just declare themselves to be located somewhere else for tax purposes, then you've got an incentive there to have them declare themselves to be located in your jurisdiction. It doesn't sound like it's a very good argument for independence, though. I mean, the sort of optimal structure for corporation tax would be to have some worldwide agreement over corporation tax levels. And you wouldn't want countries setting their own tax rates because it provides these incentives for everyone to get into a sort of race to the bottom. So I'm sort of concerned by the politics of the SNP's proposal there. What you're trying to do is tax corporations. But there is a certain logic to it in terms of we'll take some of the tax base from somewhere else.
I remember Salmond in First Minister's Questions. There you go, there's a political anorak. I usually sit and watch that. But I remember him, it must have been a good 6 months ago now, but when he was being attacked on the proposal to reduce corporation tax, he pointed out that what we'll do is we'll reduce it, but we will actually bother to collect the tax from the corporations that Westminster doesn't, and therefore we'll have a lot more. Companies like Vodafone and Starbucks that through one method or another, seem to be paying less tax than they possibly should. Do you think Salmon's point there is fair, that if you actually make a point of collecting the taxes due, then the money would even out?
I don't know. Simple answer. Perhaps it's too difficult. Perhaps there's legal impediments. I'm not a tax lawyer, so I honestly can't comment on that.
Okay. What else in the economic side of the argument has struck you so far as a particularly interesting area, either from the facts of it or from the spin of it?
I think on the sort of spin, the way the argument is being looked at appears to me to be very sort of narrow. For example, the guy from Business for Scotland had a video posted up on Bella Caledonia the other day. He set out at the start of that what he thought the important questions were, and he had a big list of them, and they were all essentially, as far as I can tell, the same question, and it's only one of the questions that are perhaps interesting. I think there's maybe three interesting aspects to the economics of independence. One is the sort of short-run position, so that encompasses all is there a transfer one way or the other? Are we being shortchanged, or are we being subsidised? The other issue is, in the long run, are you better off being a small country or being a large country? And the final one is, are there peculiarities about Scotland or peculiarities about the UK that give some indication of the way things are likely, of the way things should be structured, that you can't really generalise from a small country, large country thing. So what I'm taking from all the Business for Scotland side of things in the SNP is that they're concentrated very much on this first question, because there has been this assumption that for a long time, and sort of fact because it's been said so often, that Scotland has been subsidised, and it can be shown that this is not really the case for a long time, essentially because of oil. But the data prior to oil discoveries we don't know much about, that Scotland's always sort of roughly paid its way. That obviously is a fact that needs to be got out there in terms of what have the statistics said and why is the popular opinion so different from that. But it's very historical looking and it's very backward looking. And the interesting questions going forward, I think, especially once you say roughly we're balanced, roughly there's no transfer from Scotland to the rest of the UK, and vice versa, there's no transfer from the rest of the UK to Scotland. Approximately these things balance. We're really then looking at the issues of what's the best way to structure our economy. Is it better to be small and have local control and to have autonomy and the ability to do things differently and the ability to influence the types and levels of economic activity that go on in your own country? Or is it better to be large and to pool resources and to share risks and to provide insurance against asymmetric shocks and things? So is it better being large or small? But there's also the particularities of the UK and of Scotland. So the things that feed into that perhaps are the age profile of both countries and the decisions that the UK government would make given the other things that are important to it that might not be the optimal choice for Scotland. So the obvious one there is, to what extent does UK policy prioritise the City of London because it's so important economically to the UK? Does that systematically disadvantage Scotland? I think the more interesting discussion is much more about these long run issues, and the debate has been horribly focused on a backward looking historical analysis as far as I can tell.
So when you talk about what kind of economy we'd like to have, if we're widening the horizons here a little bit, so you could have a more sort of locally based economy, which some people would suggest is actually less subject to shocks, because one of the things the no side have tried to beat the yes side with is talking about volatility, the volatility of oil prices. But, okay, I'm not an economic expert, but to me the City of London looks like an entirely volatile gambler's paradise sometimes, with the way that the financial shocks that come in and out of London. You could make the case that the austerity and the current situation we're in with food banks and cuts and everything is as a result of the gambler's paradise that went wrong in the City of London.
You could make the case. I'm not sure I would agree with it. I think that's entirely a political choice by the coalition government. I think you could have let a lot of people take the consequences for their own failures and not socialise these losses. But yes, there's clearly a different type of diversification that you get. What you get in an integrated market is that there'll be certain activities choose to locate in one place. And when these activities have a bad shock to themselves, what you'll